We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. On that page, you can subscribe to all of our podcasts and shows on the network. Have all the newest episodes downloaded right to your phone or other devices. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, follow us on social media, and our streaming platforms. Dragos Ruiu.
Can you keep them quiet, please?
Dragos Ruiu is here with us tonight. He is the organizer of Canada's and Japan's oldest, most technical information security conference at CanSecWest and PacSec. Dragos, welcome to the show.
Howdy.
It is nice to have you, my friend. I want to start.
Have to double check the audio.
Yes, you've got a lot of things going on. You've got one of the most advanced setups that I think any of our guests certainly. It rivals what we have here in the studio. I feel like we have kind of mirror type setup, so it's really awesome. Yes, do that again. Let's see that he's got the tracking box,
yes button,
and he's got a yes button.
Oh, hold on a second.
Oh, it's beautiful. That's awesome.
Yes. And this stuff.
So, Dragos, I know you've been on the show many moons ago, but explain to us kind of how you got into InfoSec and started up CanSecWest.
Oh, CanSecWest. That was actually a funny story. That it started out. I used to do video analyzers for HP, and we were doing a startup at the time. And one of the things that we were putting out was a multi-channel JPEG codec, and we needed an event to demonstrate this thing because this is 2000, and in 2000, if you could spell internet, people would say, "Have millions of dollars, please. We want a product, anything, so we can hype it to our investors and do a pump and dump." But there was a lot of chaos back then, and so I started a conference doing computer security stuff, which is something that's always been a thread in my career for a long time because I was a sysadmin for a long time. I used to work for a company that made supercomputers for the NSA. Kind of came from a secured, trusted computing kind of background, and then went and looked into analyzers and sniffers. So I thought at that time, hey, let's get some folks over here and invite them to come present some stuff. And I think we had Fyodor presented Nmap, Marty Resch presented Snort, some of the other things. Oh, RFP was presented his RF policy, and it turned out to be kind of a really cool event. In the meanwhile, there was all this other chaos at this startup company as everybody started to get greedy and shares and taking it public and blah, blah, blah. So I was doing this conference thing, and it turned it like much more of it gained a lot more traction than I'd expected. So I just kind of kept doing it while I do my own security consulting. So meanwhile, I think that was 21 years ago, so it's old enough to drink pretty much anywhere you want. And then a couple of years after that, we started, I missed traveling to Japan because I used to do that in HP all the time. So I was kind of looking for an excuse to go back there all the time. So I started a conference there in Tokyo that has been going all this time. It's kind of a good place for foreigners to get exposure to the Japanese security industry.
Oh, so is that your tie to Japan? Is you visited there for work and kind of really dig the culture?
So when we were doing like network analyzers in those days, Fujitsu and Hitachi, and there was a lot of switch companies all producing next generation routers. It was Cisco's kind of formative era, and we used to get about a third of our worldwide business for communications analyzers out of the city of Tokyo. So I would get dragged over there to answer technical questions or meetings like 3 or 4 times a year. So I kind of grew to really love the culture and the society. And after quitting HP and missing it for a few years, I needed to get back to Japan. And for the last 17 years, I spend a month a year there. So it's pretty nice, actually.
Now, for those that don't know, where is CanSecWest held?
It's in Vancouver. So it's CanSec, western part of Canada, so that's where the West comes from. And we always hold it in downtown Vancouver in springtime around the end of ski season.
Yeah.
Although we just made the call 2 days ago that it looks like, I spent the day looking at COVID modeling and where we're going on that. And it looks like it's going to be a fast burn and we're on the downslope now. But that doesn't mean March is within that window of where people might feel comfortable to get on an airplane again or get in a car and hang out in a meeting room full of other security geeks.
Sure.
So we moved it to May.
But you've been very instrumental in helping the community in kind of modeling how to do virtual conferences, as we found out just before we started broadcasting, right? You've got deep knowledge of things like NDI and stuff that we do here in the studio, which comes in handy for holding virtual conferences.
Yeah, I had to jump. I can't say that it was a willing transition. What happened in 2019 is we had our conference on March 18th. And if you remember, around March 16th or 17th was around when everything locked down. So 2 days before our conference. So we kind of got an inkling this was going to happen maybe about a week before. So I had to drag literally every kind of little tidbit and assemble this monster we were talking about here that I over here in a meeting room at the hotel and stream out the conference with 1 week notice. So after that, it kind of like had to, I'd never heard of Zoom 2 weeks before that, right? And we were doing Zoom webinars with we were a week before. We didn't know exactly which way it was going to go. Was it going to go? We had to basically do it hybrid. So we had set up cameras and these hotel meeting rooms with presenters, which it turned out had like the 4 guys from Sweden who flew in and didn't know it was canceled anyway, and everybody else stayed home. So we had to do it was a lot of juggling. And since then, we've jumped into lots of, Discord. That was another one. I avoided it like the plague at first because my kids were on it. They'd talk to each other from room to room, and so I was like, I don't want to talk to my kids. But it's the new IRC, so we had to do that for a conference. We started wandering around with things like Gather Town and the Work World and other sort of these 2D adventure kind of wander through kinds of things. And so I've been trying to find something that gives us that same interaction, kind of friction between people, sort of those random sorts of things you get in the hallway. And I have to say, it's been a brutal disappointment so far on the virtual stuff. But the best thing I did so far is I worked on the Hugos. We streamed that, which is a science fiction award, and we streamed that out to about 5,000 people, and they had like a good 1,200 people on their Discord who were actually interacting, and that kind of worked, but it's still it's a certain personality type of person, and I guess in computer security you'd find more of those kinds of people, the kinds of person who communicates by RC and text and likes tapping versus someone who's verbal, likes to have the video things, and the tools are, they're not producing that sort of face-to-face synergy that you get really when you go out for a beer with somebody. So I'm pretty anxiously looking forward to that resuming.
And when did you start PWN2OWN? How many years ago was that PWN2OWN?
Hey, perfect straight man, because I was just talking to Brian today. This will be PWN2OWN's 15th anniversary. Wow. And I can give you, we just announced it today, actually. I can give you the plug and some fun stuff we can talk about. So, because we're giving, I've gotten a little bit jaded because we've given away so many millions of dollars over the years. We've had made a lot of hackers, giving them some pretty good revenue, but this year we're going to give away, I think, another $1 million in prizes. Here, I got to actually check my crib sheets it's $1 million in prizes. People can enter right now. We're giving away 2 cars this time. So Tesla's been easily one of the kind of more progressive manufacturers, and so they're all in on letting people beat on their cars and to stop the security vulnerabilities ahead of time rather than finding out about it and having to do a recall much more expensively later. So this year we've got a Model 3 and a Model Y. They're going to have both of those cars parked at our conference, and people will be taking attempts at various times during the day to actually hack them. And if they hack them, they get to drive them away.
Right.
That's
awesome.
the original way we started this stuff, and we still do this. It's when you own the computer or the thing that you win a hack at the contest, you actually get to keep the physical device or the laptop or whichever it is. So you get to walk away with the actual physical hardware, and that counts for the cars as well. The wrinkle this year, though.
Do you ever get concerned that people will hold on to the exploits for like longer than they normally would, so they can do it at PWN2OWN to like get the thing, get the recognition, or get the payout? Or I mean, is that a concern?
So, I think everybody has, all the vulnerability researchers have their own little stockpile of things to research and things to go when there's a window. The thing that PWN2OWN does, in my opinion, is it pushes people to polish whatever the thing they have into an actual working proof of concept, because they've got to demonstrate the thing, and they've got to actually physically own an example of the device. So it's live fire exercises. And I think a lot of people have vulns that they're not, basically haven't, they're 90% of the way there. They haven't gone to that 100%. So PWN2OWN pushes a lot of people to do that. We've seen that, and that's gotten harder over the years. We've seen now it takes like a 3 or 4 man team to do the triple backflip through the ROP chain, and then find the privilege escalations for the next level to actually get to the goal and finish goal line, right? So I'm not so worried about that. I don't think that there's any particular open window of vulnerability that's going to be keeping or whichever.
And they don't release the exploits at the conference, right? The vendor fixes it, and then
the vendor gets a copy of the exploit at the conference. We actually we go through a lot of physical security. We set up a special secured area for the disclosure where they can meet and hand over the details. And there's nobody. It gets particularly tricky. Like the competition we do in Japan, we have to over the air exploits against phones. So we have to have RF isolation boxes and do a lot of work to keep those exploits from being snooped or sniffed by people at the conference, or do a lot of things. So there's a lot of background work on keeping that stuff secure, and most of and usually the vendors will have someone on site to receive the exploits. Although these days now we've had to, as we've gone virtual, we've had to develop sort of virtual disclosure systems with the vendors and the whole system to make this work, because we run the 2 competitions now remotely, and we're all set to actually even do remote Tesla hacks last year, but the teams speaking of that, getting from 90% to 100%, one of the teams just ran into a roadblock at 95% and pulled out of the competition 2 days before the competition. So it's a lot of work. There's a big number of zeros on those prizes, because I think that you get. I have to go see I don't even know what the prizes are this year, prize schedule, but I know in previous years we've got $50,000, $80,000 prizes for the vulnerability, for different category vulnerabilities, say on the car, or if you do a jailbox escape on a browser. So there's a kind of a staggered difficulty level on the prizes, but at the high levels, that's a lot of work. And, we're talking months of development times for a team of folks to actually get that exploit to the point where they get to prove it. And they have to document the white paper. And it's a lot of work.
And Dragos, Apple has been cooperative in this competition. As we know, their relationship with security researchers is it's a rocky one, right?
So it's funny. Apple has been on again, off again, and so in general, it's kind of an interesting role that the PWN2OWN competition has. It's kind of like a discussion accelerator with vendors. Because it happens under a big spotlight, the vendors really don't have a choice but to pay attention to anything that happens there, right? Otherwise, it starts to become a little bit of a stinking pile, and so you start to see it's going to get used for clickbait. So it's in their best interest. And all of the vendors will be there and will do something about it. Now, some some of it, some of them can drag their heels on closing it down, and so that's why there's also like Google Project Zero's disclosure crime. There's a little bit of a ticking countdown.
Yep.
If the vendor doesn't fix it, then eventually the white paper gets released, and people need to know about how. If it stays there, people need to know about how mitigations can work and have to start working on alternate strategies.
Has that happened in the past? Has a vendor not fixed?
I believe it has. I have to go. I think that there have been a couple that have been released. I'll have to defer to the team at ZDI that kind of keeps tabs on each individual one. We've had so many, 15 years worth of surprises and kinks. And the one thing that's always about the competition is because there's different teams volunteering. Every year something neat happens, something shows up, and nobody expected this to go. So it's kind of tailor-made for a little bit of drama there too, which makes it entertaining and makes press cover it, and it becomes a self-amplifying kind of feedback loop there, which makes the vendors pay attention.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So we're scheduled for May this year. It's good.
May 18th to 20th, and and I believe the PWN rules and the competition were supposed to be released today. If not, they're going to be up on the ZDI site. We're changing our agenda. I've spent the beginning of this week kind of juggling with the hotel, trying to figure out how we move all our logistics and plans forward. In months, or trying to find a time slot that's available when the hotel is going to be there, and it's been challenging with schedules this entire pandemic. We've all got to be a lot more fluid, haven't we?
Absolutely. Always have a lot of projects going on, and you've got some stuff you want to show us. I was gonna. So I'm dropping into, because it's been such a busy week. I'm dropping into this a little bit. Kind of we're winging this, folks, because we haven't had a lot of prep time, and probably as much my fault as anything. But I was kind of looking through my list of, hey, what's kind of new and fun to talk about here. And one of the things that's sort of been an area of focus for me for a long time is RF analysis. Over the last few years, I've built up quite a big RF lab, and a technique that I've been using for a long time, which is to look at the RF emissions of various systems as a signature to see what they're doing and kind of identify when they're doing something funny. Hit the press, I think, a couple of days ago. There's an article in PC Week about some malware researchers that pointed a spectrum analyzer at a Raspberry Pi, and then attached an AI to read that stuff and give you an indication when you see malware on the device. And I was like, I saw this like, yeah, of course, duh. I've been doing this for about four years. So I had 10 minutes. So this is completely unrehearsed here. I'm going to walk you guys through a little bit of a tutorial of how you use RF analysis to see what your computer's doing and find something different out of the norm. So, and Dragos, for those of us that maybe have never used a spectrum analyzer, like, how do you get started down that path? Like, what does it do? What is it? How do you find one that you can tinker with?
Okay, so basically a spectrum, and I'll hold my very ominous Darth Vader spectrum analyzer here. Here, let's turn this little thing on. This is one of the cheapest spectrum analyzers you can buy, therefore one of the crappiest. So we're gonna put it here. I'm gonna actually just be fancy here. I'm gonna put it on a camera here. I'll punch it up here.
It's got a camera for that.
Yeah, I do. A little desktop cam over here. What you're looking at here is, so whatever I point this big diamond shape antenna, which is called a Hyperlog antenna, it's a very directional, very wideband antenna. And this is kind of the baseband spectrum from 0 to about 4 gigahertz. So you'll see over here, I don't have a pointer. Actually, I do have a pointer. So you can see the sort of the lower end baseband and whichever else. And then not a lot. You'll see some bursts over here at 2.4 gig, but there's a lot of dead space. The way you start in all this stuff is you get a little bit interested in ham radios and RF theory and some of that stuff. I worked in the group at HP that made spectrum analyzers. So one of the boxes made by the group I worked in is sitting behind me. So can I do this? I can do this. Let's see which I can show you. Nope, not that one. This one. So if I go over here, I've set up a camera over here, and I'm pointing to this particular, let's get this out of the way, this particular analyzer over here and some antennas. So I'll just cut to that here. So, and cut to this here. So this is the spectrum that we're seeing around here from about 0 to 500 megahertz. I'm gonna press a few buttons here, and my audio might fade out, so I'll do it. But so what we're gonna do is show you some clear some stuff here. So increase, clear. Oops. Sorry.
For our audio only listeners, you might want to check the video out for this one.
Okay, yeah. So what we have
this is
here,
seriously cool.
Yes.
Guaranteed.
So okay, so this is to show you what's going on here. This is the frequency that we're getting off a simple little antenna. This is a telescoping, about the most simple antenna you kind of can get, and I've wired it up to this spectrum analyzer here. Let's pull back a little so you can see what's going on. My messy floor. We're wiring this, and we're using this as a probe. Normally, we'd be using a different kind of antenna. We'd be using what's called a near field antenna, which is kind of like a little loop, and there's different kind of antennas you can get, and you'd be putting that right next to the computer. But for the simplicity, I'm gonna use this very crude, very not quite as sensitive antenna. So one of the things that you can do, you don't need an AI to actually be able to detect the RF coming out of your systems. A lot of the spectrum analyzers have this mode where you can do what's called peak holding. So let's switch this to this, and we'll go max hold. So you'll see that waveform there kind of slowly going up. What it's doing is it's tracking the maximum values at any particular frequency that it's seeing. So that lets you kind of build up a baseline of noise activity. You want to look for everything that isn't that signal. So what we can do is now we can just freeze that sort of as our baseline, and go over here and go to our modes and set it up so that we can now watch a live display on trace A. There we go, should be working. Let's see it. Let's test this out. Yeah, there we go. So you see what's going on at the bottom there? Mm. That is all the RF except that, let's zoom in a little. All the RF that is outside of the normal baseline. So that bottom trace is the live signal coming in subtracted from the baseband level of noise that we're seeing anywhere here. So what you're seeing me as I do this over here is I'm actually stuffing this right next to a Raspberry Pi. So those signals and those little burbles that you see down there are the RF activity that a Raspberry Pi is giving you as it goes through its normal RF and Linux stuff. And by looking at those sorts of things, there's patterns that are obvious that are happening there, and you can if you record that on a video, for instance, you could correlate that to actually process logs and see what's going on. And if you start to see bumps that really don't have any explanation on there and things that are happening on there, then it's a real easy way to see, hey, something's going on this computer that we're not expecting, and we aren't getting out of our metrics. This is completely sort of out of band and lets you really kind of get a level of threat detection on very sophisticated threats. So it's pretty easy. You don't really need an AI. Your brain and AI and eyes are better than any AI you'll train. So you can actually get a surprising amount of analysis as in 10 minutes, like I just showed you there. You saw me walk through the entire command setup that you need for that particular bit of analysis. So,
yeah, because we cover stories, Dragos, and covered so many over the years that are interesting methods of data exfiltration. And I mean, many of those are RF related, right? You can get telemetry from the screen. You can get telemetry from LED lights. You can
write a program that'll rickroll your radio, your AM radio from your MacBook from software.
Right.
Pretty easily. So that's actually one of the ways I started getting into all this stuff is I don't know if you remember, one of the things about being a security conference, and especially when you have teams internationally from all kinds of places, all countries, China, whatever, and we get a lot of interesting activity and interest in our stuff over here at the conference, including some fairly sophisticated malware threats. So I've been dragged kicking and screaming into all this stuff by some of the weird things that we see around here and some of the interesting threats that we've had to kind of debug historically. So it's been an evolution of necessity, kind of like just because of some of the strange malware stuff that we get thrown at us because we deal with 0 days and competitors and all kinds of fun history stories that we can go back through over 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered some of your stories, similar type of things over the years, and it's been very much, we've related on the show that, like, if we had seen this reported by someone other than Dragos, we'd have probably told the person to take off their tinfoil hat and, get a life. But because it comes from Dragos, holy crap.
Yeah. So have researchers, Dragos, been targeted, at events like CanSecWest, for example? Because I mean, I've heard stories too, where researchers are traveling and they come back to their hotel room and there's someone in their hotel room, like just freaky stuff like that.
We haven't had much freaky stuff. There's still always. I think it's going to be fun. This is going to sound funny, but I think that the most dangerous kind of targeting that probably happens at these sorts of things is actually on the human level. We've had some remarkably technical, very handsome or cute people just hanging around and palling up to very sort of advanced researchers, but as far as like actual creepy stuff, people breaking into hotel rooms and physical black bag stuff, I don't think that it's far too easy to target people electronically. I mean, by the time you go to the expense of having to do the sort of very complicated physical things, we've seen remarkably little of that. And we've had cases where people have said, "Hey, there was somebody hanging outside our hotel room," and we've gone back to hotel videos, and pretty much they all have been nothing conclusive, and we've never seen a smoking gun like that area. So these remain urban myth to these days as far as that kind of stuff. Now, I've heard all kinds of stories of that, but nothing's ever really been confirmed or ever really dropped out. Now,
as you're saying this, on one of my TV screens in the studio, it's saying a device is trying to connect to one of my TV screens, just as an FYI. I think that's a really strange coincidence. Someone's trying to connect a device to one of the Samsung TVs.
Oh, so I did. Once you walk down this, you take a sort of a stronger security stance, either in your office or in your home or wherever it is. You wind up going down a lot of wormholes and things that you can't really explain that eventually turn out to be bugs. And there's a lot of things that just remain question marks over the long times. Like, I mean, we've had. Let's try to think. So one of the weirdest ones we had was a bug we fixed in OpenBSD. There was an overflow in a keyboard driver that basically you could maintain, if you reprogrammed the keyboard controller, you could maintain persistence in OpenBSD, because OpenBSD, you could overflow the number of LEDs on the keyboard. And we saw this once on one of our systems because one of our keyboards owned one of our firewalls, and it was like, what the hell? So who burns OpenBSD 0 day on a computer security conference? Someone, we've seen that stuff. We've had all kinds of funny, weird stories, but it's a game of the snake eating its tail. The attackers are always working, the defenders are always working, and you've got to sort of triage how deep you look into any particular weird thing. I've gone down the rabbit hole on the RF side trying to do some of the analysis and RF exfiltration because we are just seeing things that didn't make sense, and you've got to meter your time and sort of try to hit the things that are more likely before you go down some of the more esoteric paths.
Have you had a history of, given the nature of your conference, a history of speakers that have gotten gag orders that, like, you can't give this presentation? And the second part of that is, like, has that gotten better over time?
There's always been a little bit of continuous sort of. presentations that get buried for politics. You know, it would cost too much to recall the entertainment system in this car. So maybe your researcher can't travel, or else we withdraw all your contracts from the company, says the VP. That's a real one. You know, and they happen all the time. You know, they're kind of cause celebres at the time. And if you look back, PWN2OWN was started because Apple did that to Daniel Cuthbert. That's basically they cease and desisted him with a lawyer on this presentation, and there's still a little bit of that for them. You know, they've changed their tunes in the meanwhile, and there's still occasional companies that have a kind of a regressive stance there, but they usually get beaten by the spotlight until they wise up and they hire a real security team, and it's usually a motivation for change. Right.
Yeah, and I think many of us know the people that make up some of the security teams of those big companies today. I've seen that as kind of a trend as well. You know, those researchers that we know from history, and a lot of them actually work for really big companies now, like Apple, for example.
Exactly. It's you know, it's a kind of a maturity evolution cycle, and unfortunately, sometimes some companies kind of get a little bit of institutional amnesia. You know, they have some key motivators that move them, and then go 2 steps forward and maybe 1 step back as people shuffling in and out. Because there's a lot of folks and shuffling in different places right now. It's a very volatile time in the industry, is my observation right now. So,
what's some of your favorite research to come out of the conferences in PWN2OWN, Dragos? And you know, I say that because, like, I mean, we've seen a lot of exploits and like really cool stuff, but there's got to be some that stick out. Like, we were looking at the NSO group's zero-click exploit. Now I was like,
that was brilliant. That was brilliant. Using the
right?
I have mad respect for that one. Everyone thought that was unexploitable, and then they So I'm trying to think good stories, fun things. You know, I mean, there's last year's Zoom exploit that nobody was expecting. That was one of those that kind of came out. They owned everybody without having the call drop. So that was like, wow. That's so. The only thing that's been consistent is there's always been some sort of level of surprise. I'm trying to think back. It's funny you should say this, because I'm chastising myself, because I've even started. I've tried to do this documentary thing. We've set up this exploit hall of fame where good exploit writers nominate other people that we have. You know, we just inducted Natalie Silvanovich because her stuff with the iMessage exploits and some of her iOS research was just a tour de force, and she's actually going to be our keynote speaker at our conference this year. So I've been trying to actually document some of the more famous exploits and things that we have. You know, looking back, there was a PDF exploit in around 2012 that was used for a lot of incidents thereafter. You know, we had a lot of meetings after that, presentations with guys from various governments who couldn't tell you what positions they did, and who had lots of questions. And there have been various ones that have attracted spotlights and interests from various vendors, and some techniques. I think there's been a couple that were just behind the scenes, like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And nobody actually realizes how difficult and how innovative this particular exploit researcher has come up with this really cool new way of doing some stuff. And I think that these days there's been a lot less spotlighting of new techniques and stuff. So anything that we can do to sort of increase the glory value of releasing that stuff rather than sitting on it and making money on it with exploit and bounties is a good thing. That's why one of the reasons why I'm happy doing the conferences that I am, because we're shining a public spotlight on it so that everybody can learn on it, rather than keeping this particular little toy technique or vulnerability surface in somebody's particular little toolkit. So it's going back to your question as to whether I'm worried about that competition actually keeping that window of vulnerability open longer. I think on the contrary, we're actually shortening it by shining a big spotlight and kind of giving people a little bit of a glory incentive to, you know, sign up and be a contestant and go through the work of actually demonstrating it at PWN2OWN.
Yeah, because demonstrating it is, I think, really key. As we were just talking about Log4j and how in 2016, the researchers that presented at Black Hat basically described that technique. But it didn't.
They had it on a platter right there, but nobody made the click. Is like, hey, I can do this in Minecraft, and
it's true.
I can own every Minecraft server on the planet. By the way, I was going to tell you guys. So I've looked at Log4j for quite deeply, and there's 4 different ways you can do logging. Just rip that crap out. It's you do not need DNS multicast in a logging package, right? There's 4 other systems that are much simpler, and you can do almost all the bells and whistles without the extreme featureitis that has befallen Log4j, where anybody who had a feature, yeah, sure, throw it in kitchen sink. Yeah, sure. I need to connect over the network to reconfigure this via DNS broadcast, which is for real in there. It's actually mind-boggling. So Java programmers, please use something else.
Agreed. Yeah, we were talking about all the different ways to exploit, pull off that exploit, and that's going to be a thorn in our side for.
It's money for pen testers for years. I mean, we're still seeing some of the old techniques from a decade ago on pen tests and vulnerabilities. I do security assessments about 4 a year or something as to keep the lights on because conferences don't pay so well. And I think I'm going to be seeing Log4j for 5, maybe 10 years from now, because it's squirreled away in so many embedded systems, and so many people don't even know they have it or haven't figured out that it's tickleable. And it's just payday for pen testers.
It sounds like, though, that's kind of the spirit of CanSecWest too, right? Is to highlight that research, similar to the way Black Hat does, because we often see the technique long before we see the actual big vulnerability and exploit come out for it. I think there's been a trend of that in the past 20 years, right?
There's 20 years. We've seen lots of stuff. I can't even count the number of times where presentation gets dumps some kind of technique, explains it all to the researchers. Researchers start going away. Some of the people fix it, but some of the other people just don't get the light bulb. And then 5 years down the line, somebody comes up with an exploit, hits a whole big bunch of people, and then shines a big spotlight on it. Yeah. And everybody can say, oh yeah, back then, look, they told us about this kind of heap exploit or this kind of ROP chain 4 years ago, and nobody, Rowhammer. I mean, there's so many techniques that we're still in the process of patching up because they're hard, right? Take a look at Rowhammer. We've had at least 4 or 5 different kinds of Rowhammer techniques at our conferences over the years. Last one being last year, and so there's still so many tweaks and twiddles, and it's a moving target of vulnerability in the systems there, countermeasures, and
I think Spectre and Meltdown was kind of
job security, that's for sure. Yeah, Spectre, Meltdown, a lot of those. Some of those cache and timing attacks. There's I think a lot of techniques and kind of logic bugs that we are just still learning about. And Log4j is an instant classic.
It's interesting, along those lines, I was asked earlier today, are we going to continue to see the spend in security and have the need for this attention, resources, and spend in security? I think most of us can agree, yes, but articulating that, I think, is kind of interesting, and the factors that you take into consideration to go, this is going to continue. Some of my answers were the innovation that I've seen on threats continually, just doing this show for 16 years or so, it is astonishing. And I'm constantly seeing that innovation, not on the defense side, because we see that as well, but on the threat side. A lot of the things we're talking about, these innovative techniques that just keep popping up.
And on the fences, I mean, let's not sell the blue team short.
Yeah.
Because they've made the attackers' problem much harder. I mean, we've this new shadow stack from Microsoft. There's all kinds of mitigations these days. Once you get into kernel land, it's gotten a lot. They've closed so many of the old doors that you used to be able to get through, and attackers continuously have to develop a new kind of triple backflip around the old mitigations. So it's definitely a game of cat and mouse, and the difficulty's gotten much higher over the years. I mean, these days I think things in general have gotten more robust and more secure. And we still keep finding new, and we always add new features, right? And so those always add new attack surface, and there's always new things to go wrong and new break. But even in the old stuff, it's gotten slowly more and more robust. We occasionally find something like Log4j that's been there for half a decade, or I think there was a couple others earlier this year. I'll have to go back and look at.
The pseudo vulnerability was impressive. Certainly.
Yes, that's another classic. It was there for a decade.
Yeah,
and
we hope we can close those things down. But I mean, with so many lines of code and so much out there, and especially stuff that's getting embedded in embedded systems and IoT devices.
And we're locked into it because vendors have us on this forced upgrade march. They need us. They need us to buy new vendors, so they come out with new bells and whistles, new firmware loads, new sets. That we fix the old stuff, but the new stuff might be a completely new rickety set of dependencies that it's built on. So, as with the constant mutating change, there's also a constant effort that you need for this to nail it down for security. So we're doomed to be on this treadmill. I call it my hamster wheel that I'm pedaling on for the foreseeable future. I think right now is the only conclusion we can come to.
Yeah. How do we encourage people in general, right, that are developing exploits, not to, I see you're a Star Wars fan, right, turn to the dark side, for lack of a better analogy, because as we see the exploit, the kind of black market for exploits can be extremely profitable. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars. Now, you're giving away a car, right? It's Tesla.
And you can get so you can the
Two
team
cars.
fluoroacetate who 2 cars, probably one at a time, but you can also walk away with $100,000 at the same time. I mean, we've had team fluoroacetate who got the car, I think in 2019. They went through the Bluetooth and then eventually hopped the bus over to the engine management computer and got it through that way. And one of the guys kept the, I think, $80,000 or $100,000 they do, and the other one kept the car. And previous year those guys had gotten like $500,000 in prize money from this, and one of them was a university student from, I think, University of Ohio. He quit going to school and started doing bug testing full time. So the answer, to go back to your question, is how do we keep the people from the dark side, is exactly what at least my answer is: a spotlight, fame, glory, kudos from the industry, future job accolades, and a healthy payday of prize money to compensate them for a lot of development and work they're doing. I think Pwn2Own really set the tone, and some of the shift that Microsoft, that Windows Snyder bring in. People used to frown on bug bounties, but now bug bounty programs are kind of de rigueur. If you're going to run a modern security program, you want to be rewarding people to look and to disclose that stuff rather than giving them an incentive to do the work, to talk to the vendor, because it's a bit of work. That's, I think, the other thing we do at Pwn2Own is make that a little bit easier and more painless for the researchers.
Yeah, and also I think it's being part of a community that's doing the right thing. I mean, not that some people are going to be torn between that and millions of dollars, right? But giving them the right platform, the right community, and also knowing that it's going to be fixed. And I'm not going to maybe sell my exploit to some government and really not know how it's used.
Yeah, and not know if someone's going to get hurt or what.
Right.
It's you can go to sleep at night with a clean conscience, and that is tough to put a price tag on. It really is. And so that's the sales pitch for the light side. We may not have cookies, but we've got cars.
That's right.
Question.
Go ahead, Lee.
So I was wondering, did you have you it's a 2-part question. One, have you had anything that you thought there's no way in hell they're going to pop this, and they did? And the other part of the question is, what's your unachievable holy grail of you'd love to see somebody crack, but you haven't been able to pull it off yet, or somebody hasn't pulled it off yet?
So funny, because I doing pen tests for 25 years now. I know that there's nothing that you can't get into. Literally, it's just a matter of time and effort, and there's always a way into anything. So I don't think there's anything that the gating factor to what we do is really the vendor's willingness to play ball with us and to have their device up there and to put up prize money and to work with us. And so there's a lot of, I'll say it right now. What Tesla's doing with their cars, I would love to see a Ford Mach-E and a F-150 Lightning in there from Ford and the Silverado from GM, and I'd love to see the car industry do that as a general thing. Hey, and I'd like to see some more support. Some of these things are very difficult to get a chance to hack on and some more support there. I'd like to see, if you ask me what I'd like to see, I'd like to see some additional vendors throw in their stuff. We've had a lot of support from smart TV vendors and some of the home appliances, printers, and those kinds of things lately, and that's been really great to see. And when the mobile phone vendors were very reluctant at first, but when we started doing that, they started participating. I think that really anywhere we're getting to a device like a car, which is a PC on wheels, and I don't know if I told you on this, but like for the Tesla, we have to have an AMD version and a Ryzen version because they might be different exploits depending on what CPU in there. They literally are just a PC. You got to worry about the memory configuration of your car and what CPU upgrade you put in your car if you're going to work on what exploit you have in the car. So they're PCs on wheels, and there's a lot of other things that we're getting into our life that we're getting dependent on that are literally computers foremost and their actual secondary function second most. So those are the kinds of things that I want to see us really shake up and poke at and try to make as robust as possible to kind of close up any gaping cracks and holes in them before somebody uses it to crash or to accidentally crash into a truck, or worse kinds of outcomes from power plants going off. Also, you guys remind me something else. You guys were talking about ICS and SCADA. There's a critical vulnerability in the power system. That's my dad's background's in that nobody counts on. Everybody's worried about the computer side. Phone networks. If those go down, a lot of power stuff is still, a guy calls up and they turn a valve at the big hydro station, whatever. The phone networks are a hugely key portion of our key infrastructure. And that's an aside. Let's go back to the contests.
And that's where a lot of hacking started too. I mean, at some point in hacking history, it wasn't just phone freaks, but kind of like the next kind of wave after that was the only connected computer systems were at the phone company. And we kind of lost sight of that because then every computer every computer was connected at some point after that. And we're like, oh, we don't need the ones connected to the phone company. We kind of lost sight that how critical that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's still we still see a lot of research coming through, and it's been a little alarming to me that folks don't get more freaked out about this stuff than they should, right? I wonder how much you guys we're not probably talking about any LTE networks. We're probably going over a cable modem network here and some other backbone, but our diversity's gotten a lot better, but we still have a lot of sort of key choke points that when this falls over, a lot of other things fall over. And those are the problems we should really be freaking out when we start to see vulnerabilities be spending a little bit more effort putting a spotlight on, in my humble opinion.
Do you think that the IoT hacking will kind of creep up into those concerns into a more mainstream fashion? I think many of us security researchers have gone, the security of these devices, everything from your washing machine to your sex toy, is internet connected and likely has vulnerabilities, right? And it's laughable.
Yes. And it's probably running Log4j and a vulnerable BusyBox version of a DNS resolver, right?
Right. But I mean, is that
nobody's up there?
I don't think we've seen the impact of that enough to start to affect change, at least based on the fact of impact, for example.
Yeah, because I mean, you look at where the low-hanging fruit are and what people want to do. I mean, the financial stuff is still the big target. When the crooks can make money on it, that's when you get the $1 million black hat incentives and some of the opportunities to do shady stuff. Owning your sex toy or your toaster really doesn't have a big payday. So they are vulnerable. And the problem is when you can pivot from those to get to your bank account or steal your cryptocurrency or whatever you do it. And that's a more complicated, sophisticated threat vector. But I think that the primary vulnerabilities are still so easy these days. We haven't seen that second order threat. And so we worry more about IoT in critical places like power plants or, cars, and so those sorts of things. So it's it's triage, right?
I saw something the other day. It was like, movies and TV make this hacking thing seem really like glorious and amazing, but really, if you're a pen tester, you spend your days convincing boomers to give you their passwords.
When people ask me what's pen testing like, the best analogy I said, well, it's like forensic accounting. You're the security guard and you're walking down the hall checking every doorknob to make sure it's locked, right? It's not a glorious job. It's time consuming, but it's important.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I think Larry and Tyler.
And then there's Tyler.
Yeah. It's true.
I like boomers.
Because they give you their passwords?
I was going to say, I like passwords. Tyler, we should totally hang out.
Right? I mean, but it's interesting. We talk about these really advanced exploits and all this stuff, but oftentimes the lowest common denominator is some type of identity and credentials being abused.
But that's changing too. I was Mark Sachs actually was challenging. I got to kill a phone call somewhere. I apologize.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know.
Too many electronics. Curse of the geek.
Mm-hmm. It's buried over there, so we'll just have to live with the ringtone while it goes. So one of the things we're seeing right now, though, is AI, right? Password guessing. I apologize. Okay, good. It went away. So we're just looking at. I think that we're seeing a sort of a next level of tools where password guessing is going to be done by AI password guessers, and we're going to automate some of that stuff out. So it won't be a boomer. It won't be you sending phishing requests to the boomer. It'll be some kind of toolkit of programs. You attack at their identity credentials, and we're going to be checking through all kinds of common password lists and stuff. I mean, we already used to do that, Loftcrack and all kinds of other things when we do hash checks for corporate customers or things like that, but that stuff is still changing. The computers are getting much more powerful, and so we're going to be automating through some of that stuff in the future is what I'm seeing right now. And just looking at WPA attacks.
Dragos, do you think we can do that on the defensive side as well and come up with better mechanisms to verify? Right? I mean, there's a lot of
all the antivirus vendors are talking about heuristics and some kinds of engines that are looking signatures. We're all looking for network anomaly detections. I think that stuff is well into deployment at this point. We're just going to be refining it so it actually becomes useful more than a gee whiz flashy light that tries to sell people.
Mm. How, in your assessment, has the vendor landscape changed? You think we've gotten better? We've gotten less kind of snake oil stuff that doesn't really work, or is it always been kind of a constant level? Like, there's stuff out there that works if it's deployed properly, and then there's the rest of it which really doesn't work.
I was laughing earlier when we were asking you if you've got your threat monitoring system, because I'm in the same boat. We're as small guys and can only do so many things and look at so many stuff there. And there's always I think new people who have great ideas on how they can save everybody time if you just buy this new thingamabob. And some of them are snake oil, and some of them prove to be valuable. The ones that get valuable are gobbled up and put in lots of products, and we're starting to see that. I mean, we look back at antivirus and Defender and some of the base stuff that people used to do was add-ons and be value add have been slowly getting integrated into operating systems. Some whitelists, I'm thinking of stuff like process sandboxes and some of that stuff that used to be the domain of fancy heuristic analysis is now kind of built into the OS and kind of built into mitigations. There's still this constant chasing. I think that the base computer vendors, when they see a technique being used in the security industry, sometimes put it into the whole base level and goes there. You guys still there?
Yes. Yeah. I heard beeping. I wasn't sure where that was.
I heard the beeping. It was like the Zoom dropped off and panic. It's built-in panic response now. Pavlovian.
Apparently that was my network connection dropping and beeping ensued. I have no idea.
Yeah.
It's
beepilepsy. Somebody's beeping.
I'm blaming whatever is trying to connect to Paul's TV in the studio.
Yes, and it was on that same TV, which is kind of ironic.
I actually have a separate firewall for my TV, and I keep it on a separate subnet because it's just such a vulnerable piece of crap.
The Tizen.
Put that thing in next to anything that I actually want to keep running.
Yeah, they're usually like really insecure versions of Linux, like Tizen or Android, that is not
running on a ROC chip or a MediaTek processor that hasn't been updated for the SDK hasn't been updated for 2 years or something like that. Yeah,
I keep saying this, I swear to God, but do you know the difference between a tech enthusiast and a technologist? A tech enthusiast has everything voice activated, TVs on every wall. You know, the whole house will move 3 inches to the left if you just tell Alexa to do that, whatever. A technologist has mechanical locks and a printer and a baseball bat if the printer starts talking.
I can't do it over here, but I actually maybe I can just hold this some little bit. But as part of my language. So go over here and do this. Over here, I'll show you my last line of defense, which is my DEC VT520. Which is my serial console.
Oh my gosh!
And so it's the last generation that they actually put out, so you can connect it to an LCD screen, a real monitor. Don't have to have a big CRT, and it also goes 115/200, so that you can use it as a console on something modern. When it gets down to reading logs on something forensic, when I really, really want to trust something, I go back to that dinosaur because there's no damn way anyone's hacking and doing an exploit on its old Z80 processor on it, and it's absolutely trustable in its simplicity.
I don't know. I don't know if I could trust a DEC terminal running at 115K baud. That's awful damn fast for that thing.
Mm-hmm. That is metal.
Yeah.
That is metal.
Yeah.
Rock and friggin' roll, dude.
Yeah. And without a 40-pound CRT on top of it, is it really genuine?
It's ersatz retro.
It's retro.
Lee, the problem is with 40-pound CRTs, we give us all hernias.
Dragos, we have this conversation often about, what are the security basics? What's basic security hygiene? You do pen testing and things like that. What's your advice for people that are like, I need to define a basic hygiene, basic security? Where do you get them started?
So I'll go. I ask every single one of my customers, what's your backup plan? Mm-hmm. If it's digital and you don't have 3 separate copies of it in different places on different media, one in the cloud, one on a USB stick, one on another USB drive, and then one locked in a vault in a storage locker, then you don't have 3 copies, it's already gone. Just assume it's going to be whatever. And if you haven't tested the backups, so backups are like your first thing. But the other thing too is to not overload your devices. I see so many people that have got their phone as their single point of failure. They've got all their banking on it. They do literally everything from one device. They keep their LastPass passwords on it. They've got all of these things in one multiple single point of failure. And I tell folks, hey, you've got secure financial stuff, buy another damn tablet, buy a device and use it only for the financial stuff. I've got 3 separate levels of Wi-Fi networks here for guests, for kids and home use that's not very secured, and for business stuff. And you want to kind of defense in depth and have segment more. It's more management hassle. It's a little bit more equipment hassle, but it adds so much more security in lowering your attack surface on the things that really matter. So think about what you really care about and what you can get hurt by losing and maybe keep that away from checking the various memes and Facebook and whatever you click on for your news, and you don't check your URLs so carefully. So stuff like that. That's for a home user. For corporate customer, it's sort of another level. You want to think a little bit more, but then that gets more complicated these days because you can do desktop as a service. It's much more complex these days, I think, than ever been, deciding on what kind of security stance you want to have.
Yeah,
for your
but Dragos,
company.
I like that your home user example, even for the enterprise, and that's really reducing your single points of failure. And when we looked at Kronos, comes to mind when you said that, right? Because people were like, "Oh my God, we couldn't process payroll," and I'm like, "Well, isn't that like the doomsday scenario? Shouldn't there be like a lot of different things that have to go wrong before your customers can't process payroll?
Certificate authorities too. I mean, there's so many people who I've seen put their certificate authorities on the same box as their mail server and things like that. And there's so many sort of things that you really want to think about. You want to class your information. I mean, there's a reason governments and agencies that have been working with security have different levels and different kind of propagation levels and controls on information, because you can't extend that. You can't be super secure on absolutely everything, right? You can't check every URL your kids are going to be clicking on in their room or as they play video games. And you want to be able to put a little bit of distance between that and some of the things that are going on. And the same thing happens in a company as well, especially when you get the financial information or certificate or log information. Going back to Log4j.
Absolutely. More questions for Dragos? Tyler, Josh, Larry?
Man, I want to spend more time talking, but I'll hit you up on Facebook or something. We'll talk, man.
Absolutely. I unfortunately I love this stuff, so I can babble for hours.
Well,
I eat, breathe, and sleep it. So
that's why we'll talk more. Hey, I've already downloaded NDI.
Absolutely.
While we were talking.
Oh, yeah.
I downloaded it.
Yeah, we were talking about NDI. So it's the only protocol that I could find that implemented audio and video over the network really, truly well.
Not only audio, it gives you 16 channels of audio.
Yeah, it's multi-channel audio.
It's ironic, though, because if you think back, NDI comes from Newtek.
Yep.
And that was the company that started out doing video switchers on the Amiga way back when. They were the hobbyists' video choice for if you couldn't afford the big studio stuff.
TriCast.
And
they made TriCast.
From that humble beginning, now they own any professional studio, they're doing anything with NDI, all the film, all that stuff. They've become the video industry. So it's been kind of ironic to watch that transition. Blackmagic is the other one too.
Yep.
I mean, they support NDI, and they kind of knocked a zero off all the professional video stuff with their switchers and some of their lines. I mean, you can buy a switcher for $400. DaVinci Resolve is free. You can get professional color correction like all the feature films use, and just download it and do it if you have the time to go through the tutorials and stuff like that. So there's a lot of tools that have become much more democratized in the video arena that you and
there was a vulnerability
and a lot of security, right, in those protocols and devices.
Well, DaVinci Resolve had a vulnerability recently too. It was I think a privilege escalation.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. Those complicated video parsing of files, we're going to be seeing those for decades. I actually wrote a book about MPEG. I have somewhere, so I know quite a lot about it because I produced an analyzer for video analyzers for HDTV stations. And one of the things that's really interesting about all that stuff is the standards only specify the decoder, not the encoder. So there's all kinds of games that are played around with this, because you've got basically half the picture, and everybody can implement the encoder and the protocols in their own damn ways as long as the decoder performs that. So there's a lot of gobbledygook, variable length fields, people that use this field and not that field. So the parsers themselves in the software are Swiss cheese orama. We're good, and plus it depends which version of video codec you have. This compression system, it's very Baroque sort of protocols, and it's parsers. It's going to be, we're going to be finding vulnerabilities like that, or some of the WebRTC stuff that underlies all this stuff on the PC. There's going to be a lot of things. It's interesting you should mention that, because that's one of the things that Natalie Silvanovich is actually going to present at this year's CanSecWest conference. She's been looking at the web video protocols and some of the messaging protocols for quite a lot. And her presentation this year is going to be literally vulnerabilities in those areas. So we're already seeing that continue to play, and I don't expect to not be putting on video vulnerability security presentations 5 to 10 years from now. We're still going to be talking about it then.
Absolutely.
Do you think there's a precipice at which we or vendors begin to evaluate and make effective changes in security before the consumer starts to evaluate that as a purchasing decision? Mostly we'll call it 98% of people outside of our group and maybe some some government stuff are evaluating their purchase decision based on price, and even the people with security still evaluate price. So manufacturers have very little incentive to do security as at a beginning point. Are we getting closer to that precipice where manufacturers, vendors are all going to kind of address these and build this in as part of a good product because it's demanded by the end user and consumers?
I think there's two things. One, I hope, I pray all the time, please let people start to value security and start to vote with their dollars to really encourage the guys that are doing a good job to give them the sales. And there's a little of that. People, I think, have become more aware of that. But I think there's another factor that's happening as well, is that security comes from also robustness and simplicity. And we have this sort of technological evolution cycle where everybody introduces the bells and whistles and everybody's going, ooh, shiny thing, let's buy that. And then they realize, oh, I never use any of these things and it's only this green one here that matters. So the next thing they buy, they only look at for the green thing. And so there's sort of a simplicity that happens as the products mature. And I think that has an inherent security and lowering, we don't have all those bells and whistles because consumers stop caring about it. And we've kind of distilled the device to its cheapest and simplest essence, and we're starting to see that. I mean, I'm trying to give you a pithy example of some of the places that we're seeing that. We see that as the products mature, and I think that is going to help consumers as well. I mean, let's treadmills. Let's look at that. So there's Nordic Track is the leading vendor there, and they sell this thing called iFit, and has asks you for your email before it starts the stupid motor and starts your treadmill, and goes through all this stuff. And pretty much the earlier version of that were very, very Byzantine, had all these things. They would give you a Twitter feed on your treadmill and do all this other stuff in their stupid, crappy MediaTek Android embedded, updated box. But consumers really didn't care, didn't buy the product that had that versus the other one. So the vendors kind of stopped doing that. And so the new ones are much more simpler. They don't have a lot of the same bells and whistles. And we're seeing that kind of evolution in many, many products. Maybe it's Peloton or whatever the competitor bike, the smart exercising thing in that kind of sector. So for instance, for IT or home routers, unfortunately, home router is a bad example because they're always trying to put in some new bell and whistle. Wasn't it the vulnerability 2 days ago was the USB over the network vulnerability? I was like, I didn't even know they'd added that in 2 years ago, and now it's in millions of devices, and it's vulnerable because they want you to be able to access the USB memory you plug into your access point on your PC, which the consumers really care if they can do that. Do we need all that attack surface? We don't know, but the vendors keep trying to sell us some new, fresh, rewarmed blinking lights and bells. So that's a bad sector. But the sectors that have kind of refined the internet portion of their products, I think, are becoming more secure as a result of that refinement. It's the long answer.
And yet the scary part is that the things that really are critical, that if our water supply goes down or electric grid goes down or the internet, heaven forbid, goes down, pandemonium, chaos, stock crashes, all of those things rely on things that aren't really focusing on security first.
I really don't. I honestly don't want to know the number of old Windows 7 boxes that exist in some of those places, because it would keep me up at night.
I think that's why we drink so much in InfoSec.
I think that's true. The other thing too is on pen tests. How many times have various people that are watching this with security? I've taken 2 years ago's pen test, cut and paste, and put it into this year's pen test and handed it over again, because we just don't fix a lot of stuff. Sometimes it's difficult to beat that drum to get the attention to do the rolling up the sleeves, all that stuff. So it's I say I'm agnostic. I hate all computers equally because they're all pieces of junk in one form or another.
It's so true. It's so true.
The next color assessment will fix it. We're at purple. We might go to pink, and that pink assessment might be the answer. Red team wasn't, obviously. And
Dragos, we just have we have 5 questions left for you that we ask all of our guests. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Oops, my yes button isn't turned on.
There you go.
Yes.
There's the yes. Dragos, 3 words to describe yourself.
New contestant. 3 words to describe myself. Technophile, cynical, and optimistic.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Serial killer, weapon of choice. Well, I'm shying away from the microwave gun because I have the RF lab downstairs. So that would be the simple, easy choice. But I think I would say iMessage.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
The Republic of Gadgetstan.
That's amazing. What is your favorite hacker movie?
Oh, easy. Sneakers probably has to be still the one and the classic one.
The one behind Hackers. I get it. Yep.
Yeah, the original.
Sneakers is better.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
2 celebrities. Okay. So I'm not a very big celebrity.
Oh, it can be anyone from history, anyone from any work of fiction.
I don't know. Elon Musk can adopt me so I can work on all his stuff. My Starlink dish just arrived. So
nice.
And who else? You know what? Let's be controversial and inclusive and say what if he's gay and he married Alan Turing?
Fantastic. Dragos, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Cheers. It was actually fun talking to you guys.
Absolutely. It was a blast. Coming up next, the security news. Stay tuned.